Hello everyone, my name is Cynthia. I would like to share a story with you, something that happened between me and my stepson. This is something hard for me to talk about, but I hope you will listen, learn and tell me what you think about it afterwards.
I never imagined I'd end up marrying a man 18 years older than me, but life doesn't always go as planned. Jerry came into my life when I least expected it, a man full of love, kindness, and a gentle spirit. He was everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner. But Jerry wasn't just any man. He was a widower with a teenage son, Emma. I knew from the beginning that loving Jerry meant embracing his past, including his son. I was ready for that challenge, or at least, I thought I was. Emma wasn't a little boy anymore. He was 17, tall, with his father's striking features. But he carried a cloud of sadness and distance in his eyes. He didn't like the idea of his father remarrying. I could see it from the moment I moved in. "Good morning, Emma," I greeted him with a warm smile on my first morning in the house. He looked at me, said nothing, and walked past me like I was invisible. My heart sank. But Jerry, ever the optimist, held my hand and whispered, "Give him time, Cynthia. He'll come around." I nodded, but deep down, I worried. Would he ever see me as more than an intruder in his home? Days turned into weeks. I did my best to win him over. I cooked his favorite meals, packed his lunch for school, and even cleaned his room when he left it in a mess. But Emma never said thank you. He barely spoke to me. At meals, he would sit in silence, barely acknowledging my presence. When I tried to start a conversation, he would give me one-word answers and focus on his phone or his plate. I won't lie, it hurt. But I never gave up. One afternoon, Emma came home from school with a minor cut on his hand. I noticed it right away. "What happened to your hand?" I asked gently. "It's nothing," he muttered, trying to walk past me. But I wasn't going to let him brush me off this time. I quickly grabbed the first aid box and motioned for him to sit. "Let me take care of it." He hesitated, but eventually, he sat down. I cleaned the cut carefully, making sure not to hurt him. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "Thank you, Auntie Cynthia." For the first time, I heard genuine warmth in his voice. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time since I moved into their home, I felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, I was in the living room watching a TV show when I heard footsteps. I looked up, and to my surprise, Emma was standing there. "What are you watching?" he asked, his tone surprisingly friendly. "Can I join you?" I was so shocked I almost dropped the remote. "Of course. It's very interesting." He sat down beside me, and we started watching together. For the first time, we shared something, laughter, comments about the show, and a few small conversations. It wasn't much, but it felt like a breakthrough. From that day on, things began to change. Slowly, Emma started coming around more. He would join me in the kitchen while I cooked, asking if I needed help. He even started calling me Auntie Cynthia more often, and each time he said it, it felt like a little victory. But as time passed, I noticed something strange. The way Emma looked at me began to change. His compliments became more personal. "You look beautiful today, Auntie Cynthia. Your smile is really nice." At first, I thought he was just being kind. But there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the look of a son admiring his stepmother. It was something deeper, something that made me uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. But every time he looked at me, every time he lingered a little too long in the kitchen or found excuses to be near me, that nagging feeling in my gut grew stronger. I didn't know what to do. Jerry was often away on business trips, leaving me alone with Emma. And while Emma hadn't done anything inappropriate, his presence was starting to feel different. One evening, as I stood by the sink washing dishes, Emma walked in. He stood behind me, a little too close for comfort. "Do you need help?" he asked softly. "No, I'm fine," I replied quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. But he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me. "You know," he said after a moment, "you're really beautiful." I froze. My heart started pounding. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep things light. "That's sweet of you to say." But it didn't feel sweet. It felt different. That night, as I lay in bed beside Jerry, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. Was I imagining things? Was Emma really acting differently toward me, or was I reading too much into it? Should I tell Jerry? I decided to keep quiet. After all, I wasn't sure what was happening. I didn't want to cause problems if there was nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew something was off. And it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. Days turned into weeks, and I could no longer ignore the strange tension growing between Emma and me. His compliments became more frequent, and his presence was constant. Every time I entered a room, he seemed to be there, always watching, always finding ways to be near me. At first, I told myself it was just coincidence. Maybe Emma was just trying to bond with me now that we were getting along better. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. One afternoon, Jerry left on another business trip. As usual, it was just me and Emma at home. I tried to keep myself busy, but no matter what I did, I felt Emma's eyes on me. He wasn't saying much, but his silence spoke volumes. Later that evening, I was sitting in the living room when Emma walked in. There was a strange look on his face, a mix of nervousness and determination. He stood there for a moment before walking over and sitting across from me. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice serious. I put down the magazine I was reading. "Sure, what is it?" There was a long pause. Emma looked down at his hands, then back up at me. His eyes were filled with emotions I couldn't quite understand. "I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I've been feeling something. Something I know I shouldn't feel." My heart started racing. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. Emma took a deep breath. I have feelings for you, Auntie Cynthia. I've tried to fight it. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. You're beautiful, kind, and you've treated me better than anyone ever has." For a moment, I was frozen in shock. My mind was spinning. How did we get here? How did this happen? "Emma, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "You can't say things like that. I'm your father's wife. I'm your stepmother. This is not right." "I know," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I know it's wrong, but I've tried to ignore it, and I can't. I've never felt this way about anyone before." I stood up, needing to put distance between us. My hands were shaking. "This conversation needs to end, Emma. You're confused, and you're young. These feelings, they're not real. You need to stop." Emma stood too, looking hurt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I just couldn't keep it in anymore." Without another word, he turned and left the room. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, fear, disbelief. For the next few days, I avoided Emma as much as possible. I stayed in my room or spent time in the garden, anywhere I wouldn't run into him. I couldn't bring myself to tell Jerry. How could I? This was his son. How would he react? What if it caused a rift between them? But no matter how much I tried to avoid Emma, he found ways to be near me. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, he came into the kitchen. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I kept my eyes on the pot in front of me, refusing to look at him. "There's nothing to apologize for. Let's just forget about it." "I can't," he said. "I've tried. But I can't stop feeling this way." I turned off the stove and faced him. "Emma, listen to me. You're a good boy, but this is wrong. You need to let these feelings go. You'll meet someone your age, someone you can have a real relationship with. But it can't be me." Emma's eyes were filled with sadness. "I know. I wish things were different." Without saying anything else, I walked out of the kitchen. That night, I made a decision. I had to tell Jerry. Keeping this secret was eating me alive, and I couldn't handle it alone anymore. When Jerry returned from his trip, we went to bed as usual. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. "Jerry," I whispered, gently nudging him awake. He turned to me, half asleep. "What is it, darling? I need to tell you something. It's important." He sat up, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's about Emma." Jerry frowned. "Is he okay?" I nodded. "He's fine. But something's been happening. Something I've been afraid to tell you." Slowly, I told him everything: Emma's behavior, his compliments, and finally, his confession. Jerry listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wasn't sure," I said. "I didn't want to cause problems if it was all in my head. And even after he told me, I was scared. I didn't want you and Emma to have issues because of me." Jerry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Cynthia, you did the right thing by telling me. I need to talk to him." The next morning, Jerry called Emma into the living room. I stayed in the bedroom, listening from a distance. "Emma," Jerry began, his voice steady but stern. "Cynthia has told me everything." There was a long silence before Emma spoke, his voice trembling. "Dad, I'm sorry. I thought you were a good boy," Jerry said. "I thought I could trust you to look after Cynthia when I'm not around. Why would you do this?" "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Emma said, his voice filled with regret. I couldn't control how I felt. I know it's wrong. I'm sorry." Jerry's voice softened. "Emma, I know you're confused. You're young, and these feelings can be overwhelming. But you need to understand, Cynthia is your stepmother. She loves you as part of this family, but that's where it ends." "I know," Emma whispered. "I'm really sorry." I could hear the emotion in his voice, and it broke my heart. He was just a boy, lost and confused. Jerry was right, we needed to help him, not condemn him. After Jerry's conversation with Emma, I hoped things would go back to normal. I thought Emma would feel relieved after apologizing, and we could move forward as a family. But what happened next surprised me. Emma started avoiding me completely. It began the very next morning. Usually, we would at least exchange brief greetings in the morning, even if it wasn't much. But that day, when I walked into the dining room, Emma got up from the table without a word and went upstairs to his room. His half-eaten breakfast was still on the table. I stared at the empty chair, feeling a knot in my chest. "Good morning, Emma," I called after him, but he didn't respond. The only sound I heard was the door to his bedroom closing firmly behind him. That was the beginning of the silent treatment. Days passed, and Emma continued to keep his distance. He stayed in his room most of the time, coming out only when he was sure I wasn't around. If he saw me in the living room, he would quietly turn and head in the opposite direction. When I called him for meals, he didn't come down. Instead, I had to take his food to his room, leaving it outside his door. "Emma, your food is here," I would say softly. Most times, he didn't respond. Sometimes, I heard the door open after I walked away, and I knew he had taken the plate inside. But he never said thank you. He never even looked at me. One evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard footsteps. I turned around, hoping to see Emma. But as soon as he saw me, he stopped in his tracks, turned, and walked back upstairs. I sighed deeply. It was like I was invisible to him. The house suddenly felt cold and lonely, even with Jerry around. I missed the days when Emma would sit with me in the kitchen or watch TV with me. Now, he barely acknowledged my existence. The silent treatment wasn't just about avoiding conversations. It was in his every action. He stopped leaving his dirty laundry in the basket in the hallway, something he used to do regularly. Instead, he did his own laundry, making sure he didn't have to interact with me. He stopped leaving his school bag in the living room and started keeping everything in his room. One afternoon, I was cleaning the living room when I found one of Emma's books on the couch. I picked it up and went to his room to return it. "Emma," I knocked gently on his door. There was no answer. I knocked again. "I found your book downstairs. I just wanted to return it." Still nothing. With a heavy heart, I placed the book by the door and walked away. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the door open and the book being taken inside. But he didn't say a word. Jerry noticed the tension, too. "Cynthia, have you noticed Emma has been keeping to himself a lot lately?" he asked one evening. I nodded, not wanting to say too much. "He's just adjusting, I guess." Jerry sighed. "Maybe I was too hard on him when I spoke to him. He's a sensitive boy." I wanted to tell Jerry the truth, that Emma's avoidance was hurting me. But I didn't want to make things worse. One evening, I was sitting alone in the living room, hoping Emma would come downstairs. The house felt too quiet. I missed hearing his voice, even if it was just a simple good night or thank you. But he never came. I sat there, lost in my thoughts, when I heard a soft knock on the door. My heart leapt with hope, thinking it might be Emma. But when I opened the door, it was the delivery man dropping off a package for Jerry. I closed the door, disappointment washing over me. Weeks passed, and the distance between Emma and me grew wider. He was avoiding me physically and emotionally. The silent treatment was like a wall he had built between us, and I didn't know how to break it down. I decided to try one more time. One evening, after dinner, I knocked on his door again. "Emma, can we talk?" Silence. "Please, Emma. I just want to make sure you're okay." Still nothing. I leaned against the door, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "I care about you, Emma. And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." There was no response. Defeated, I turned to walk away. As I reached the stairs, I heard his door open slightly. I glanced back, but he didn't come out. Instead, I saw a shadow retreating back into the room. The silent treatment was painful, but I knew Emma was struggling. He was ashamed, confused, and hurting. And while his silence hurt me deeply, I understood that he needed time. One evening, Jerry found me sitting on the couch, lost in thought. "Cynthia, are you okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. I forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." Jerry took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Emma will come around. He just needs time. He's a good boy. He's just confused." I nodded, holding back tears. I hoped Jerry was right. I hoped Emma would find his way back to us, back to being the sweet, caring boy I knew he could be. But deep down, I wondered, how long would this silence last? And what would it take to finally break the wall between us? 6 weeks after Jerry confronted Emma, the silent treatment continued. I was exhausted from the emotional strain, and each day felt heavier than the last. Emma's avoidance was taking a toll on me, and despite my best efforts to reach out to him, nothing seemed to work. I kept caring for him in silence, leaving his meals outside his door, washing his clothes when I could, and tidying up his room whenever he wasn't home. I wanted him to know that, despite everything, I still cared deeply for him. But it felt like I was speaking to a closed door, both literally and figuratively. One quiet evening, Jerry and I were sitting in the living room after dinner. We were discussing plans for a vacation when we heard footsteps coming down the stairs. We both turned, and there he was, Emma. He stood there for a moment, looking hesitant, as if he was debating whether to keep walking or turn back. My heart started racing. It had been weeks since Emma willingly stayed in the same room with me. "Emma," Jerry said, breaking the silence. "Do you need something?" Emma nodded slowly. I want to talk to you both." Jerry and I exchanged a glance, and he nodded for Emma to come in. Emma walked over, taking a seat across from us. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting in his lap. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Emma took a deep breath and started. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly. "About everything. About what I said to Auntie Cynthia." I felt my chest tighten at the mention of it. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I braced myself. "I was wrong," Emma continued, his voice filled with guilt. "I shouldn't have said those things to you, Auntie Cynthia. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable or hurt you. I was confused and ashamed." His eyes met mine for the first time in weeks. I could see the sincerity in them, and it made my heart ache. "I'm really sorry," he said. "I know I've been avoiding you, and that wasn't fair. For these past 6 weeks, I've been seeing the school counselor, and she helped me realize that what I felt wasn't right. It wasn't love, it was confusion. You've been kind to me, and I mistook that kindness for something else." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as he spoke. I had waited weeks to hear these words, and now that they were finally here, I didn't know how to respond. Jerry, ever the supportive father, leaned forward. "Emma, we're proud of you for realizing that. It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong." Emma nodded, his gaze still fixed on me. "Auntie Cynthia, I know I hurt you. I'm sorry for everything. Can you forgive me?" I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I nodded. "Of course, Emma," I said, my voice trembling. "I forgive you. And I want you to know that I've always cared about you. You're part of my family, and nothing will ever change that." Emma's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. "Thank you," he whispered. He paused for a moment, then added, "I've been thinking, if it's okay with you, can I call you Mum from now on?" My heart nearly stopped. I stared at him, overwhelmed with emotion. "Mum," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Emma nodded. "You've been more than just my stepmother. You've cared for me, even when I didn't deserve it." And I think my real mum would want me to accept you as part of our family." I couldn't hold back anymore. I got up from my seat and walked over to him, pulling him into a tight hug. Emma hugged me back, and I could feel the weight of weeks of tension lifting off our shoulders. "Thank you, Emma," I whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." As we pulled away, Jerry stood and joined us, wrapping his arms around both of us in a group hug. "We're a family," Jerry said softly, "and we'll always be here for each other." Later that day, Jerry suggested a family vacation to Dubai to celebrate the news. "During the holidays, we'll all travel together," Jerry said, grinning. "It'll be a fresh start for us." Emma looked thoughtful as he said to his dad, "Oh Dad, I already made plans for the coming holidays with my cousin Tony. I am going to Enugu to spend this coming holidays with him. Please, and sorry I won't be able to join you and Mum this time. Hopefully the next holidays, I would be available." Jerry nodded. "That's okay. We'll go on another trip when you're free." Emma grinned. "Just make sure you take care of Mum while you're there. No business meetings." We all laughed, raising our glasses for a toast. As we clinked our glasses together, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. We were finally a family. This is the end of my story. So dear friends, what do you think about the way I handled the whole situation with my stepson? Did I handle it well or not? Please, I will like to see your opinions on this. And if there's a part 2 of this story, what would you like to see happen next? Make sure to share your thoughts on the comment section below, and please, as you do that, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. And finally, thank you for watching and sharing your opinions with us so that every one of us can learn from each other. See you on our next video, and bye for now.